Hi everyone, this is Sam Black with Drafting Archetypes, and today I'm going to be talking about blue-black in Aetherdrift. As always, the notes are available to follow along at patreon.com/draftingarchetypes. Blue-black is among the bottom half of archetypes in terms of win rate. It's like third or fourth from the bottom. And it's also among the top half in terms of most drafted archetypes. It's like third or fourth most drafted color pair, which suggests that it's currently overdrafted. That might explain some of why I didn't have a lot of success in the last three drafts I did. I was like hard forcing blue-black to try to get a better feel for it because it's not an archetype I've naturally gravitated toward or had a lot of success with. And last week, I was in a similar position with white-black, and after studying it and drafting it, I'm actually really high on white-black. I've done very well with it and continue to do well with it. So I figured I should put the work in to try to figure out blue-black, and did not have the same level of success. Coming off of white-black, I think that I overestimated the significance of start your engines and the black cards that are good at playing toward that kind of game in blue-black. I think while blue-black can gain speed very reliably in a way that makes it the best color pair for using Aether Siphon, the blue-blue 1 artifact that starts your engines, and when you have max speed, mills your opponent for 2 whenever you draw a card, and you can spend 2 and tap it to draw a card. That card is very good in blue-black, and blue-black uses it well because it can start engines pretty well because of flyers and the many black cards that help with that. For the most part, blue isn't very invested in engines or speed, and a lot of the biggest payoff that you're getting in black-white is from white, or especially the black-white gold cards. And without those, it's really not worth going far out of your way to prioritize getting speed, especially getting speed quickly. Even with Aether Siphon, it's generally less important that you get speed quickly than that you can get speed eventually. Aether Siphon works much better as like a control finisher card advantage piece rather than like a turbo mill strategy. So you really want to focus on staying alive more than you focus on getting to the point where you can mill your opponent out as fast as possible. And then if you stay alive and you have a siphon, you've won the game. So I think that was kind of my early missteps with blue-black, was prioritizing engine stuff like Risky Shortcut and Hour of Victory that I had liked in white-black, but those really aren't what you're looking for in blue-black. Blue is much better at providing whatever card advantage you want, and you really want to be looking for defensive tools and artifacts more than you're looking for the engine stuff. To the extent that blue-black cares about synergies, I think it's a lot more invested in artifact synergies, which is really just like raw artifact count. But, leaning into high artifact count means that, like, Guidelight Optimizer, the 1 in a blue 2/1 that taps for a blue that can only be spent on artifacts and activated abilities, plays well here. You have a lot of activated abilities and a lot of artifacts most of the time. And card draw, so you have a lot of ways to spend mana, and you're looking for more ways to generate mana to take advantage of all that stuff. So I've talked, somewhat consistently throughout talking about Aetherdrift about the black common artifact cluster, Pactol Terror, the 3 in a black 3/4 that drains your opponent for 1 when it or another artifact enters. Grim Bauble, the black artifact that gives a creature -2/-2 when it enters, and you can spend black and 2 and sacrifice it to surveil 2, and Wreckage Wickerfolk, the 1 in a black 1/3 flying artifact creature that surveils 2 when it enters the battlefield. All of those are fantastic here, and you're really looking for like those and Spin Out, Engine Rat, and Maximum Overdrive as the good black commons. And then similar to white-black, you're basically taking all the good black commons over all the good blue commons because the black commons are just better. Same as with black-white. And then once like you're not seeing the premium black commons, then you're looking for like Hull Drifters and Flood the Engines, and the interactive blue spells like Bounce Off the blue, Return an Artifact, or a creature or vehicle to its owner's hand, and Spectral Interference, whatever the counterspell that counters creatures and artifacts is called. And then the artifacts like Guidelight Optimizer and the Mangler, the 3/3 vehicle that crews itself on your opponent's turn. Just kind of like the artifacty blue commons and the interactive blue commons. The like exert blue commons are a lower priority here, though, you know, I think like Keen Buccaneer and the 1/3 flyer, exhaust. The 1/3 flyer that exhausts into a 3/5 and Keen Buccaneer are playable blue cards, but shouldn't be prioritized in this archetype. So those are the commons you're looking for. Uncommons. Hunt the Network is really good. It's a big part of what's going on. It's not the best performing blue-black uncommon. That goes to the bouncy tortoise guy, the 4 and a blue 4/4 that reduces your opponent's speed if they're ahead and bounces something. I think Hunt the Network is like the second best performing. They're both very good. You're, you know, looking for all the like uncommon blue and black artifact stuff. Notably, you are not looking for Haunted Hellride. It's very overplayed. It's one of the most played uncommons in blue-black. Unsurprisingly, every blue-black deck can get it, and it's easy to think that you would want to play an on-color uncommon, especially since it's an artifact and you're like looking for artifacts. The card is bad. I don't really understand what it's trying to do in the archetype. It has bad stats. I recommend just not playing it. Some other uncommons that I want to call out as substantial underperformers. Wretched Doll, 1 and a black for a 3/1, and you can pay a black and tap it to surveil. This card has generally underperformed for me. The body just isn't a very good size, and the mana to use the ability is very costly. And Hour of Victory. Hour of Victory, I mentioned before, I like a lot in white-black. It's played really well for me there, but it performs badly according to the stats in blue-black, and I tried playing with it while I was prioritizing engine stuff in blue-black, and it was pretty underwhelmed. So I think it's best to just avoid Hour of Victory in blue-black. Splashing here is similar to splashing in most archetypes, in that I don't recommend it in this format. Ordinarily, a blue-black control deck that's looking to play a long game, play a lot of removal, draw a lot of cards is exactly where I would be like, yep, this is the deck that wants to splash. But I think that with like Spin Out and Hull Drifter, both being cards you're highly prioritizing, you're likely to have cards that cost double colored mana in both of your colors. And to get enough fixing that your mana is good requires prioritizing fixing highly enough that I think the opportunity cost of pursuing it is just not really worth it in most cases. There are some individual gold cards that have individually good win rates, but when you look at the win rates of the decks that play those gold cards, they're considerably lower than the decks that just play blue and black cards. I also looked at the relative win rates of blue-black with a splash compared to other two-color decks with a splash to see if, like, in general, on 17 lands, decks that splash have a lower win rate than the decks that don't splash. There are a lot of confounding factors here. In general, you're more likely to splash if your colors are more contested. The more contested your colors are, the less good your deck is going to be. So it makes sense that in general, the decks that splash are going to have a lower win rate, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the players who splashed are winning less often than they would have if they had not splashed in their particular draft. So it's hard to conclude a lot just from those stats. So what I did was I looked at the relative decrease in win rate when a blue-black deck splashes compared to when a deck of another color pair splashes. And while I would generally expect a more controlling color pair like blue-black to suffer less when it splashes, that wasn't, as far as I could tell, really the case. So a little bit of further evidence, data-driven, to support not splashing in blue-black. I think, I was saying, to the extent that blue-black wants to focus on synergy, that synergy wants to be artifact count. You can get to a point where, your Seeker Serpent is a fine card in blue-black. It's not good, but it's kind of nice to have, a big finisher or card that, blocks well. And it's not unreasonable to have a deck that can cast it reasonably cheaply. Not early, but you can, play it and another spell in the mid-game. And so prioritizing artifact count is nice, but you don't want to get crazy with it. I don't think you ever want to be drafting the deck with a mindset that this is an affinity deck to the point where you're taking artifacts just to be artifacts over good card advantage or good removal spells. I think that more than anything else, you're just looking for good removal spells, some, good card advantage. Your focus should be drafting this like a control deck. And where I have been running into trouble in the drafts where I'm forcing blue-black is that I have not had enough removal, and my opponent plays a thing that is problematic for me, and I don't have a good answer to it. And that hurts when you're trying to be able to just sit around a lot. As a result, while I dislike Flood the Engine in general and most decks, I do believe in its role in blue-black, and I do think that it's worth actively prioritizing, not just playing in blue-black, as unlikely as I personally am to do that very much. I think that the big issue that I have had with blue-black is that it wants a lot of removal, and given that it is overdrafted, that it's drafted a lot more than its win rate suggests that it should be drafted, presumably the removal is very highly contested. And so my advice regarding blue-black is prioritize removal and only get into blue-black when it's open and you can get the removal, because I think that you're in a pretty rough spot when you don't have removal. And I think that basically covers my thoughts on blue-black. So, relatively simple and straightforward, possibly less nuanced than it could be if I had found a more successful formula personally. As I mentioned, my own experience has been more making mistakes, not doing very well with it, and then doing some research to try to figure out what I must be doing wrong, and concluding, I think correctly, that I'd been prioritizing engine stuff too much, and you want to focus on generic control stuff, top priority, artifact synergies, middle priority, and then engine stuff, low priority that shifts as you get specific high payoffs for getting your engines working, with Aether Siphon being the card that you are most likely to care about. And with that fairly concise overview, I'm going to turn it over to Twitch chat for additional questions. As always, I would encourage you to check out patreon.com/draftingarchetypes to get involved in supporting the podcast. voting on what I'm going to talk about, choosing to make me try to figure out blue-black when I list it on the poll while being a little bit underprepared for it. But hopefully I've managed to do the archetype justice for the most part and figure some things out. So, that said, anyone in chat, do you have any questions for me? How is blue or black individually in Aetherdrift? If you see blue, what color pairing do you prefer? Same with black. So, theoretically, I think the color pair ranking, or the individual color ranking, is green is the best, followed by black, followed by blue, and then red and white are worse and pretty close to each other. For me, I think if you are either blue or black, you would prefer to be green if green is open. I think that outside of, well, green's good, I'd like to be green if it's open. I have really liked I've really liked white-black. So if I'm black, I do like to pair it with white. And if I'm blue, I also kind of like pairing that with white, honestly. Blue-red has been tricky. Blue-black is tricky. Blue-white is straightforward, but I think relies on a few specific cards, like whether you can get the relevant artifact synergies. And blue-green is kind of generically pretty good. As far as like how much should you avoid blue-black or anything, I don't think you should really avoid it. Like if it's there, I think it's fine. I just think that you shouldn't really look for it, especially since I think too many people currently are looking for it. Was blue-black bad at splashing compared to other non-green color combinations too? I think it was just kind of generally comparable to the other color pairs, Kelvandal. It was all, close enough that it didn't seem like there was a strong trend, but it was mostly just looking to see if there was a clear sign, and to me there wasn't. I would say feel free to do your own research on that one if you have further questions on it. Let's say I first pick Haunt the Network, but it starts to dry up. At what point should I try to hop out of the color? I think that when you first pick Haunt the Network, which is totally reasonable to do, you should look to be blue-black, of course, and you should look for the common black artifacts in particular, but I would say don't get married to it and have a willingness to, splash it in a white-blue. I think it goes pretty well in white-blue splash black or white-black splash blue. And then kind of reasonably in, a green deck, but less. You're going to have fewer artifacts, but better mana. I think that my approach to first picking Haunt the Network at this exact moment would probably be look for it, but be willing to pivot off entirely, I guess, more than Splash, which is not how I generally treat Splash, theoretically splashable 5-mana sorceries, but I just really don't like splashing this format, so I think that's probably what I would recommend doing. And at what point should you try to hop out of the color? I don't know if there's another color that's clearly open and your colors don't seem very open. Are any of the blue-black rares excellent? I noticed something funny about Winter, which is that Winter is in 25% of blue-black decks. If your opponent is playing blue-black, there's just a 25% chance they have Winter, because it's not taken very highly, and no one's going to try to splash it, but basically everyone who's blue-black is going to take it and play it. Winter's pretty good, but not like a bomb or anything. It's solid. As far as just general rare quality, I really recommend just going to 17 lands or Untapped and looking at the stats on the rares. They're usually pretty clear and conclusive. Back one, pick one, you open Winter and Haunt the Network. Under what conditions do you pass both? Under what conditions do you take one and which the other? If it's pack 2, pick one, and you're already in blue or black. I'm taking Haunt the Network over Winter. if I'm taking either in basically all cases, and passing both if there's another comparably good card. This is one of those spots where I don't really want to be blue-black from pack 1, knowing that I'm competing with someone else who's blue-black in pack 1, and I'm pretty sure that someone pretty close to me is going to take the other one, and I will be fighting them. But, like, I'm going to take Haunt the Network over, like, mediocre cards if those are the only 2 good cards in the pack. And if it's pack 2, pick 1, and I'm already in blue-black, I'm definitely taking Haunt the Network. And if I'm in only blue or black, I'm definitely taking Haunt the Network over Winter if I'm going to take one of them. But I would probably rather take a card that fits whatever I'm drafting and doesn't require a splash or pivot if there is such a card. If there's not a card with reasonable upside, then I would probably take Haunt the Network. Do I look at 17 land ranking for top player or just general setting? In general, rather than sorting by top player. There are exceptions, but when a lot of what I'm looking at is going to be within a single archetype, and there the sample sizes get pretty small for top player only. Also, a lot of what I'm looking for is for the purpose of a podcast for a general audience, and there I think aggregate performance is more relevant to the average player than specifically filtering to top player. And how I have generally started in assessing how to prioritize stats in 17 lands is looking at the different ways that one can sort by all the different available sorts and see which sorts give a list that most matches my intuitive list, which sounds like an exercise in bias confirmation, but I think it's just an exercise in, skill expression. And when across multiple sets, the same sorts match my expectations the same ways. So if a single sort most frequently organizes cards as I expect strongest to weakest to be, then it seems like there's more reason to believe that that sort is showing me something useful. And I guess I've felt like the top player sort doesn't outperform the aggregate sort in terms of delivering lists of cards that make sense to me. I think some weird things sometimes happen with top player stats, likely due to their potential to be biased by a single player who drafts the same archetype a lot a certain way or something. Maybe that's purely a guess. Do you think there is a general mindset you should have when evaluating cards in this set? Seems like there it is high on mid-range. Can aggro compete, or is it easily squashed? It is the case that games in this format are on the long side for recent formats. It is also the case that I think that I have generally liked proactive decks and being ahead on board. That is in line with approaching decks with an eye toward aggression, but I think what aggro means is somewhat contextual, and it might be the case that there are certain sets of cards that one might expect to be looking for when one is trying to be aggressive that might not line up well in this format. So I guess that is to say, you need to pay attention to how the cards let you do what you're trying to do. As far as general mindset evaluating cards in this set, I don't know. I guess I don't know exactly what's being asked in terms of mindset. I think to evaluate cards, it helps to have an expectation about the terms of engagement for the format. And I think those terms of engagement include things like big creatures perform better than average. There are more large creatures with reach than usual. Combat tricks are good but hard to play because vehicles are present and somewhat powerful, and the overlap in needing a creature creates unique tensions for the format in terms of how aggressive decks are built. Vehicles are good on offense in a way that makes blocking difficult because they require tapping additional creatures to attack with big creatures. The fact that vehicles are big makes them hard to block. So the format, in a way, doesn't lend itself well to blocking, which does favor being more aggressive, but in a way that's complicated based on vehicles being hard to play a lot of and somewhat volatile in terms of how your deck performs when you do play a lot of them. To be more clear, how important is your 2-drop threshold this set compared to 4+ CMC creatures? I think that across all limited sets in the last decade plus, having a good curve with a lot of 2-drops such that you can expect to play a 2-drop basically every game is extremely important. I don't think this set is different in that regard, but I do think that the role of those 2-mana creatures might vary from set to set, and in this set, they're often going to be there to enable vehicles to do stuff like set up engines or whatever. They're rarely, I would say that there's rarely an expectation that your 2-drop by itself is going to successfully push a lot of damage. Does Spectral Interference have a place in competitive blue-black decks, or do other needs make it more often the card that you don't want to play? No, I think that Spectral Interference is pretty good. I think that you're mostly looking to be like a low synergy, high interactive, control style deck that's mostly exchanging cards with your opponent and getting hard card advantage out of stuff like Stock Up and Aether Siphon and Hull Drifter, and Spectral Interference is a reasonable, versatile answer that's often going to trade up on mana. Why does the tempo value of Trip Off and Bounce Up seem undervalued in blue-black? I thought they'd be stronger without a good counterspell. Well, my first thought is that blue-black isn't really a tempo deck. That's not you're not great at capitalizing on the extra time. You're more of an attrition deck. And so, going down a card for Bounce Off isn't great. That said, Bounce Off, while it's a card that it's hard for me personally to find a deck that wants it, I know that it has pretty good stats. I think that there's enough card advantage that the time that it buys can be good. Also, I've mentioned that I think the combat tricks in the format are really strong, and Bounce Off is a really good answer to an opposing combat trick. Trip Up just doesn't really offer tempo value. The problem with Trip Up is that it's generally trading down on mana, so it's tempo positive for your opponent. And when it is trading up on mana, it's often answering something that has a very good ETB ability and giving them access to that ability again. Also, that kind of card often comes with some sort of bonus, and the bonus can cycle for 2 mana is a worse bonus than that sort of card often gives. Another question about 17 lands. Do you look at win rate for pick in deck, ever drawn, or other aspect? I find the most useful aggregate stat to be game in hand win rates, but I do like to cross-reference with the other ones. In particular, like when evaluating a splash card, for example, I think it's good to look at the game played, like the win rate while it is present in your deck, to acknowledge the cost on the rest of the deck of like playing a splash. You said you don't love Flood the Engine. It seems to be effective long-term removal most of the time with little enchantment removal. Why don't you like it? I don't like it because there are ways to punish it, and I don't like cards that create vulnerabilities that could cost me. It's a matter of preferring to generally play in the least exploitable way, just to lower variance in my games. Like, if you flood the engine something and your opponent has Trade the Helm, for example, you have allowed them to give you nothing, essentially, without needing to work to have a safe object to give you. Most of the time, it works out. Sometimes it doesn't. When it does work out, it is still 3 mana sorcery speed removal, which in general is not something that I consider to be exceptionally powerful. I like my removal, where possible, to be instant speed, to be able to get more value than just trading 1-for-1 out of it. This is a card that will sometimes be worse than trading 1-for-1 and basically never be better than trading 1-for-1. I like it in blue-black specifically because blue-black makes very good use of reliable, clean 1-for-1 trades because of the amount of card advantage that especially blue offers. But that's why, in general, I'm not that high on the card in other archetypes. Question about Trade the Helm. It's polarizing. What's my experience with it been, particularly in blue-black? So, Trade the Helm has a pretty low win rate on 17 lands. I personally have liked and had some good experiences with Trade the Helm. I think that you have to be willing to play and make sure you have some cards that are good to give to your opponent. I think the best enablers are Treasure Made from Ticket Tortoise, the Grim Bauble, and to a lesser extent, Guidelight Matrix. And then sometimes you can give like Thopters or, random 1/3s or whatever. It's also fine to just give an actual Ticket Tortoise if you're not trying to attack on the ground, which is often going to be the case in blue-black. Sometimes it goes poorly. Your opponent has a bounce spell, being the worst case. But overall, I think that it goes pretty well. I assume that its low win rate is primarily a function of people playing it in decks that don't properly support it in terms of reliably having something meaningless to give away. But it is also appreciably clunky. Like, it's 5 mana, and you need the setup of having a reasonable thing to give away. Overall, I like the card, but I do think that there's a fair bit of competition at 5 mana in blue-black. Helldrifter and Haunt the Network being the biggest examples, but then there's a question about, is Trade the Helm better than Siphon Fuel? I think yes, but not by a ton. So I think where I'm at with Trade the Helm is it generally shouldn't be taken very highly because it usually goes late and you can usually table it. And I think it's better to, when you see it early, start drafting cards to support, reliably having things to give away in anticipation of tabling it, and then pick it up on the wheel if you have good support for it. I think that the ceiling on the card is extremely high, and I don't think it's that hard to realize. So I still broadly think of myself as liking the card, but I do think you want to be careful with it. And because giving away Grim Bauble is so good, and Blue-Black wants to be highly prioritizing Grim Bauble anyway, I do think Blue-Black is a particularly good deck for Trade the Helm. Also, Momentum Breaker is a card I want to talk about briefly, just in that, in general, I think Edicts are very bad and limited. Momentum Breaker really impressed me in White-Black, just as a way to reliably get engines started, and when you're routinely at max speed, 4 is like a very meaningful amount of life to gain. So, and it has pretty good stats. So that got me into playing Momentum Breaker quite a bit more and kind of prioritizing it. And then when I shifted to Blue-Black, I continued prioritizing it. I do think that it's much better in White-Black. As with all the engine stuff, I think it's a lower priority in Blue-Black. And I think you really want to be careful not to play Momentum Breaker and Flood the Engine in the same deck, due to not wanting to draw Momentum Breaker after you draw Flood the Engine. And I think that, particularly since it's common, you would rather be on the Flood the Engine side as an expectation than the Momentum Breaker side. Though, if it's later in the draft and you see a Momentum Breaker and you don't have any Flood the Engines, you might not want to worry about it. You might just expect that you won't see a Flood the Engine and it'll be fine. All right. I think that's going to wrap us up for this week. Thanks for listening, and thank you very much, especially to Twitch chat for the questions and additional topics. As always, I will be back next week, well, almost always, and I will be, for now, continuing coverage of Aetherdrift. So, hope you're enjoying the format. I think that it plays very well, despite some issues with color balance. So, I'd say I'm still having fun with it. And bye for now, and I'll see you next week.
Prepare for light speed.